في تصوير يا ابني في تصوير استوعب. طب انا عارف خلصت.
Okay, so they'll be out further at the end waiting to grab somebody or protect them.
That footage that you just watched was recorded last week in the Gaza Strip at the site of a Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food distribution location in Rafah, in the southern part of the Strip. You can see clearly the calm before the site is opened up to the public and the ensuing chaos as the hungry converge on the site. Our guest today is Andrew Fox, former UK military man, fellow with the Henry Jackson Society, and prolific writer, who visited the site with GHF officials just last week for a first-hand look at their incredible humanitarian work in the Gaza Strip. For more on that, I suggest you watch my recent interview with GHF Executive Director Johnny Moore. You can find the link to that in the podcast notes. This podcast, featuring Andrew Fox, is presented in two parts. The first is our interview that was recorded on July 21st, just as the humanitarian crisis was blowing up in terms of media and diplomatic focus and attention internationally. Andrew draws on his extensive military experience, including in humanitarian relief zones, to assess what is and is not going on. And the second part of this podcast is an interview I did with Andrew on the morning of Thursday, October 7th, today. And this, of course, follows his recent visit to the GHF food distribution site. Andrew is old school, an honorable man who understands the complexity of war from a military perspective. That is Andrew Fox's experience and value. He is also a truth teller. He does not hide facts to support a preferred narrative or any political agenda. And that takes tremendous courage these days. I expect that you will learn and benefit greatly from hearing his thoughts, as did I. This episode with Andrew continues a series of podcasts that State of Tel Aviv dropped in late July, focusing on various aspects of the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. We include the links to all of those episodes in the podcast notes. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wonderful to see you, Andrew Fox. Fresh, just back from holiday. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Ready to resume the craziness that is the Levant and all the mad stuff you lot get up to.
Okay, and look, before we started rolling this, you mentioned that you were away in a beautiful vacation spot for about 10 days and were pretty successful in unplugging.
Moderately successful. I was clever. I set up a few articles on schedule, so that sort of kept dropping on my Substack. That was good. But then obviously Syria went insane, so I kind of needed just to stay roughly on top of it and keep my fingers in the pies to make sure that I wasn't coming at it from a cold standing start when I got back.
Because I was actually going to ask you, like, what's that like to go on a vacation and kind of, unplug? But we'll do that some other time. I'll do a self-help series. All you Middle East addicts out there. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you, obviously, about a really serious topic. I mentioned to you that a day or two ago, I interviewed Ahmed Al-Khatib, who, as you know, is from Gaza originally, maintains a lot of contacts there, his family, his friends. And what we were talking about is a subject that many of my subscribers and listeners and readers have been asking about, the food situation in Gaza, the humanitarian situation, which I think we can probably all agree is cataclysmic for a whole bunch of reasons. And there have been many phases to this. But you are a really experienced military man, and you put out a great piece the other day. If anyone doesn't read Andrew's stuff, go on a Substack and read it, because you're very, very quick, very good writer. And it was like, yeah, it's a war, but it's just a war. You've been in wars. You've been in these situations where there are humanitarian crises. So, what I'd like to hear from you, just as we open, Andrew, is what's different about Gaza, or what's not different?
Really, it's a messaging piece is the difference with Gaza. There is a 50-year-long superpower-backed Cold War propaganda campaign that surrounds everything that happens in either part of the Palestinian territories, be it Gaza or be it Judea, Samaria, West Bank, whatever we're calling it today. And really the challenge, I think, for any analyst is to cut through that propaganda campaign and work out what's actually happening. Because I think when people go through this maximalist, extremist, hyperbolic version of events, what you actually do is miss out on the genuine human suffering and you minimize that. And if we can cut through the noise to find out where the actual suffering is, then you're in a position to actually do something about it. Whereas if you start screeching that everyone in Gaza is dying of hunger, that's clearly not true. And that does a disservice to those Gazans who really are in food shortage and need assistance. So that's the real challenge for me. When it comes to other war zones that I've been in, I mean, there's a reason that the four horsemen of the apocalypse are what they are. Famine, pestilence, death, and whatever the other one was. It's a sad fact that war and humanitarian challenges go hand in hand. And it's another sad fact that the purpose of a war is not to prioritize civilian comfort. These are brutal truths. You don't fight a war to make sure that the civilians in the war zone are happy and comfortable. Now, you have legal humanitarian obligations that you have to fulfill, but they're actually pretty minimalistic. And by the same token, the laws of armed conflict are quite permissive. Like, there's a huge amount of damage and harm you can do quite legally in a war. So we're in a situation then in a war zone where actually you don't have to do that much for civilians, and you can do very, very awful things and kill a large amount of people, and all of it be entirely legal. And this is where we run into the real problem, I think, and that is that legal and moral are not the same thing. So you have to work out where the morality line is as well as the legality line, and that's the real challenge, I think.
So, before we kind of zoom in on what's been happening for the last month or so with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the Gaza Strip, we had before that, 21 months of war, greater and lesser intensity in different parts of the Strip. And we've also had many alarms about imminent famine throughout the Gaza Strip, all of which turned out to be completely unfounded. I mean, there may have been people who had less food than they might like at different points. I'm not in any way diminishing the severity of the issue or the tragedy of it, but in terms of there being a widespread famine, that just never materialized. And so then we have Israel, for whatever reasons, it decided this is the time. And they decided we're going to completely cut out the United Nations run relief agency, humanitarian agency, that had been the primary distributor of food in the Gaza Strip. There were others, but we'll leave them to the side. Israel said, no, we're going to cut out all these other players, and we need to control food distribution because many reasons, but a huge reason is that we know, and Hamas boasts about it sometimes when they show off their warehouses, but that Hamas was intercepting humanitarian aid, hoarding it, and then selling it to the public at extortionate prices. And they were also doing other things with food. And food has become one of the most powerful weapons and commodities in the Gaza Strip. So Israel's saying, fine, we'll let the food in, but we're going to control how it's distributed and to whom. And so this new organization, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, it's an NGO. Their job is to get the food to the people, right? And it's really challenging right from the beginning. They begin and they say, okay, we're going to have 2 distribution sites, and then we're going to expand to 4. And I think they're at around 4, 5, 6 now, something small. There's a lot of discussion and debate over where those sites are going to be located. We have certain extreme right ministers in the current Israeli government saying we're going to concentrate them all in the south because that'll force the population to the south. And that's kind of what we want to do, create this closed humanitarian zone. That eventually, after a week or two, everyone realizes, well, no, wait, we have to have maybe one or two in the middle of Gaza, maybe in the north. But the bottom line is you have very, very few distribution points for over 2 million people. With UNRWA, when the UN was running it, there were over 400, I believe, and now you're down to 4. And so we have people walking for hours. They have to go through multiple checkpoints. They have to deal with criminal gangs. They have to deal with Hamas. And they converge on these distribution centers. And then there's almost every day another report of civilians being shot at, a number of civilians being killed in this, what it sounds like is a panic, a stampede for food. The other thing is these distribution centers are only open for a very short period of time, creating this kind of crush as opposed to, operating on some kind of ID-based system. So this is what people are hearing. This is what they're hearing abroad. This is the news that we receive in Israel as well, is that there is limited food supply and that the people who are hardy enough to try to get to the distribution sites, that it may be a life and death excursion. So I know that was like a really kind of long setup, but I think it's really important to put the facts as we think we know them out there. And I want you to kind of explain, what have I got wrong or right? And what do you know? And what's your understanding? And just, give us, Andrew Fox's critique / response to what seems to be a very untenable situation with respect to food aid in the Gaza Strip.
Your take on it tallies with my understanding of what's going on. So there's no real factual point to disagree on or try and correct you on there. I think we've got it about right. I think we need to look at, first of all, the strategy behind it. Let's start right at the top and the political goal. Now there's two options on the table that are discussed about. First of all, is your Ben Gvir Smotrich, get everyone in the south and then get them out, and then ethnically cleanse that part of Gaza. Clearly, that's not something I would ever support. Obviously, it does have a degree of support within Israel, but I don't get the sense certainly from my Israeli friends, that is a majority opinion that people like and are on board with. Option two, and I think this makes a bit more military sense, is when we talk about counterinsurgency, we talk about separating the people from the insurgent. Now, in counterinsurgency, you're also trying to win over hearts and minds and establish alternative governance. And I don't think Israel's doing any of that yet. But what they are trying to do, I think, is physically separate the people of Gaza from Hamas's control. And it makes sense, I think, to seize control of the aid mechanism that has been so important. Up to 25% of aid has been seized by Hamas during this war. And we're still seeing that with trucks going into northern Gaza particularly, which is obviously not part of the GHF construct. It's all the humanitarian agencies that are bringing stuff in slowly. There's huge build-ups of aid at the border, but they are bringing it in. And we're seeing Hamas trying to nick it still. So there's stuff going on there. So strategically, it does make sense. If you're going to keep fighting this war, and, I'm on record, I think they should have ceased fire and declared victory a long time ago.
Another important point that we agree on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been writing that. I think the first time I mentioned it was last July, and I went firm last November saying, cool, I think you've done enough, or you reasonably can now. But if you are going to push on, let's just put my opinions to the side. If Israel has decided they are cracking on, then it does make sense to sort of separate the people of Gaza from Hamas in that sense. So that makes sense. But then we look at the operational and tactical levels, and as you say, there's simply not enough aid points for 2 million people. They are handing out millions of meals. And if we look at raw numbers, we know there's enough food in the Gaza Strip. Before the war, the big thing was 500 trucks of food going in before the war. Absolute nonsense. If you look at the details, actually about 70 trucks a day before the war were going in with food. Throughout the duration of the war, it's been almost double that figure. And on average, across the war, we're on well over 3,000 calories per person per day have gone into the Gaza Strip. And on top of that, during the ceasefire, as much as 6 months, as few as 3 months amount of aid went in during that ceasefire month. So even when Israel put a full blockade on, there should have been enough food in the Gaza Strip to feed everyone. That there hasn't been very much points towards a distribution issue, not a delivery issue. So, I think we can start stripping through the disinformation here. We can cut through the lie that Israel is somehow stopping the food going in. It's a distribution issue on the ground. I think Ahmed and I pretty much agree on that, actually. So looking at those raw numbers, it very clearly points towards the fact that Hamas still have some control. They still have the ability to stockpile. They still have the ability to feed their people at the expense of ordinary Gazans, and they still have the ability to sell food to raise money to pay their fighters. And that's tricky. Now, throw in the military activity, and I don't think you can separate what's happening with GHF from the military activity that's going on the ground. This is all part of one military campaign. So we have to look at it in the round. I think that the big issue we're seeing in the last 48 hours is finally going into the central camps, Deir Bala and those kind of areas, which the IDF has never been in before. The reason it's never been in there is because the hostages were known to be mostly there. So Hamas's one properly intact battalion was in the central camps area. The concern there for me is what about the hostages? Have they moved from central camps, or has there been a decision that actually Israel's placing less emphasis on protecting their lives at the expense of not attacking Hamas? I mean, these are the big questions that haven't been answered, and I'd really like to know the answer to, quite frankly. So in the round, you can understand what they're doing is separating Hamas, physically from the people, whilst hitting the final Hamas battalions. And we are seeing that drumbeat of Hamas commanders dying over the days and weeks. And then what next? You still haven't articulated what next. And I think that is a real problem because, first of all, it gives scope for all these crazy conspiracy theories that Gaza is going to be ethnically cleansed. And now we're seeing allegations of concentration camps in the south and all these horrible Holocaust false analogies. So yeah, you're creating a vacuum, but also by not providing any alternative to Hamas, you're essentially giving Hamas a green flag to keep fighting because they know that as soon as the fighting stops, they can retain control. And we are hearing rumors of clans in Gaza, being empowered to sort of take the fight to Hamas rather than the IDF do it. I don't think we've seen any substantive success on that yet. So it's potentially that's an alternative governance mechanism that might be creeping in, but again, there's nothing concrete here. So while we look at aid, we have to look at what's going on around it, and that's what I think the plan is. It's split the aid from Hamas, degrade Hamas to the maximum extent possible, and then try and empower somebody else to take over once Hamas are fully weakened.
Well, as you point out, sort of not even just the day after, how about the next 5 minutes? The sort of, strategic / forward planning in Israel by the Israeli authorities, primarily, I think, the government, because obviously at the end of the day, they direct the idea. And we know that there has been tension throughout between the Prime Minister's office and the IDF. But a few months ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu appointed Eyal Zamir as his new IDF chief of staff. And the tension has not subsided. If anything, it has stayed at the same reasonably high level or increased. Zamir is roundly regarded as being a very, very tough, experienced, and excellent military leader. And he's resisting a lot of what the government has been trying to get him to do with the IDF. For example, supervising these aid distribution sites. And Zamir says, and rightly so, I'm a military commander. The IDF is an army. We're simply not trained to manage these situations. Help our listeners kind of understand what's the gap? What's the gulf? Why is it so difficult for a military force, a conventionally trained army, to kind of shift gears and oversee food distribution?
It's a matter of training, validation. It's a matter of planning and orders. I mean, this is not a conventional military task. And, yes, you can guard a site. The military does that all the time. Every time you stop and set up your own forward operating base or overnight camp, you set up a guard. So that's not something that's particularly unusual. But then you have the mechanism that goes behind it. And I think perhaps this is one area where a Western army, a non-Middle Eastern army might do better, because what we have is long logistics chains. We have the ability to deliver trucks and food, and we have divisional logistics points where that kind of distribution happens all the time, because we're used to operating at reach. We go the other side of the world to fight, whereas Israel's fighting on its doorstep. So you've never needed that long logistic chain. And actually, one of the flaws of the military campaign has been just keeping the IDF in the field resupplied. They've had real problems with even just getting tank parts forward, because the way that the way the system's been set up, it's just not designed for that long, enduring, huge logistical demand campaign. So that's part of the reason is the IDF just doesn't have the kind of institutional knowledge. It doesn't have the historical experience. It doesn't have even down to the kind of supply chains that perhaps armies who are expeditionary are more used to having. So that's really tricky for the IDF, I think. Secondly, we're talking about crowd control here, and that's really, really difficult. Like, and when we do crowd control, we talk about public order. That's the kind of doctrine that underpins it, public order sort of campaigns. And, I've done a lot of that myself, and it's kind of more of a soft touch. You're not doing it in a war zone. You're not doing it while there's kinetic operations going on left and right of you. It's normally a sort of peacekeeping operation where you only use lethal force as a final option. Now, any IDF troops going forward to try and maintain crowd control would be doing it in a war zone. So immediately you've got troops with loaded weapons going in. You've got troops, fully ready to open fire at any time because they know they might be attacked from any direction. And to then try and have them take that combat mindset and map it onto trying to protect and control civilian crowds, it's just exceptionally challenging. And that's why I think we've seen them using this tactic that I don't like. I know John Spencer doesn't like it, and I think you'll be very hard pressed to find anyone military that likes the idea of controlling a crowd through warning shots and opening fire. That's just not helpful. I mean, I don't see many other options on the table. I don't think there's huge numbers of other things they could do, especially given that the IDF perhaps doesn't have the war zone crowd control set up. Like, what else is there on the table other than trying to use shots? And then on top of that, you've got Hamas who are obviously going to try and draw fire. If I'm Hamas, I'm sending gunmen into those crowds every day to open fire on the IDF and try and get return rounds coming back at me. So this is just an exceptionally challenging thing to do while a war is going on around you. It's not even an area that's kind of out of the war. You've still got enemy fighters who can infiltrate towards your positions and shoot at you. So it's just exceptionally challenging and difficult. And I don't think any army would massively smash this out of the park.
So, I mean, based on what we do know over the period of the war, and in particular in the time leading up to early April, or sorry, it was late March, pardon me, when the IDF cut off food supplies going in to the Gaza Strip for a period of time, there was a surplus of food that had been allowed into Gaza, as you were saying, the 3,000 per person calorie allocation, which is way more than an individual needs. And that had been entering Gaza for a really long time. So there should have been, and there must have been storehouses. And we know, in fact, there were. I remember there were some videos that came out of Hamas warehouses that were filled to the brim, and some civilians broke in, and then Hamas came in and shot the civilians. But it's a huge mess. But we do know that enough food was allowed in, that the food has been hoarded by Hamas, maybe some other criminal gangs as well. And that now, though, food is becoming scarcer. I don't think anyone would dispute that fact. And on top of that, we have the chaos created by the very limited number of distribution points. And as you say, this kind of very kinetic environment where combat is ongoing and the hostages are. So we've basically got an enormous mess. And as far as we know, there's been no planning in terms of some kind of political construct or process or infrastructure, some multilateral force infrastructure or alliance coming in to take care of food distribution and other humanitarian needs. We know that Israel said, we're done with you, UN. We're just done. We're done with giving Hamas the food. And it's the vacuum you referred to earlier that is just kind of creating this vortex and this chaos. It's a gloomy message, but that's pretty much the summation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, the one thing I've always said when I've been conducting analysis on this war for the last, what are we on, 21, 22 months now, is don't do ground holding, don't create vortices. They're the two kind of golden rules. And, we are now seeing IDF casualties because they're trying to ground hold. That's the one error they really avoided prior to Gideon's chariots. Throughout Swords of Iron, they they were religious about not holding ground. And there's negatives to that as well, because you have to go in and clear repeatedly. But since Gideon's chariots kicked off, we've seen a very different ground holding approach to Gaza, and that is going to see casualties go up, I suspect.
And Gideon's Chariots, just for those of you who aren't totally obsessed like we are, is the name that was given to the renewed operation in the Gaza Strip that began after the last ceasefire, so late March, early April.
Yeah, and it's a total change in scheme and maneuver. And I think it's actually the plan the IDF would have done in October 23 had there been not Biden in the White House. I think this is what they would have done from the word go. But now trying to do it 20 months later, plus the other months that have happened since, I think is challenging. It's challenging. And yeah, like I say, I think we're in the law of diminishing returns now. I think that the strategic damage that's being done to Israel is so huge at this point that actually it's counterproductive. I mean, hell, you've got pretty much every ally in the world, apart from America, signed a letter today saying stop immediately. And yes, some of that is based on disinformation. Some of that is based on the shootings at the GHF sites, which I think there is a lot more to than is being reported on. I think there's a lot more nuance and shade with that, and I don't think the IDF have explained it particularly well. And yeah, I don't quite understand why the IDF is still in there. Declare victory, pull back, and find another way to get the hostages out would be my take. But hey, I'm just some British dude sat here in Surrey, so that's my take anyway.
I mean, this is a bit of a frustrating topic, I know, because we go in circles and really don't end up anywhere particularly satisfying or forward-looking from an optimistic, in terms of optimism. But thank you, as always, Andrew, for your thoughts. And before I let you go, I have to ask you quickly.
Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be any movement on the hostage thing?
I'm similar to you. I mean, it's difficult because I don't think it's going to happen without some kind of deal. And we're running in again to this key conflict that's been embedded in Israeli strategy since the start of the war, and that is you can either completely destroy Hamas or you can get the hostages home. You're not doing both. And while Bibi keeps prioritizing this attrition on Hamas, and there's some pretty low-level goons being killed with some very expensive weapons. It's literally not bang for your buck. And while Bibi keeps prioritizing that, I don't see how Hamas can come to a deal, because they know the second they give the hostages back, they're dead. So they've got no incentive. So, I think it needs a bit of fresh thinking, and it just needs somebody to say, hey, we've taken out like 90% of pre-war Hamas here. We've taken out X percentage of the tunnels. We've stopped their strategic weapon capability of firing into Israel, and in anything but more than bursts of 2 or 3 or 4 rockets. Like, that's a pretty good strategic outcome. Now let's get to fixing our international reputation, because it's firmly in the gutter at this point.
Thank you, Andrew, as always. Wonderful to talk to you. You look refreshed. I don't expect that to last too long.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, my friend.
You take care. Thank you so much. So that's a wrap for part 1 with Andrew Fox, really laying the foundations for what is going right and wrong from a military operational perspective in the Gaza Strip on the topic of humanitarian aid, because there's a lot going on there. We will now turn to the second part of our interview with Andrew, an in-depth look at what he saw and experienced during his visit last week to the Gaza Humanitarian food distribution site in Rafah. He has also allowed State of Tel Aviv to use his exclusive video footage taken while he was in the area. And before we move on to part 2, I would like to thank all of our subscribers, well over 10,000 on various platforms, for your continued interest in our content. It really does mean the world. Please recommend State of Tel Aviv to those you think would be interested in what we produce and provide. Also, if you are not already a paying subscriber, I ask you to please consider taking out a paid subscription. Just go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, and follow the prompts. It's really easy. Or you can make a one-time contribution at Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. The link is on the screen now and also on the homepage of our website. We at the State of Tel Aviv are independent, meaning that we rely totally on your support in order to do this work. It's intensive, intense, and time-consuming. If you appreciate our efforts and are able to support us financially, please consider doing so. Thanks, as always, for being here. And now, to part 2 of our special episode with Andrew Fox. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.